Hannibal, the fabled Carthaginian warrior. His enemies said, he's mean, he's nasty, he doesn't play well with others. Rule number one in the ancient world, mess with Hannibal and there will be blood.
30,000 gallons of blood were spilled on the battlefield down there.
The question is, should we trust a man's enemies? Was Hannibal a great general or just a ruthless killer? Our investigators will put Hannibal's life under the microscope, conducting a range of scientific tests and retracing his path of death and destruction.
It's a detective story, putting clue to clue to clue.
A psychiatrist will put Hannibal on the couch.
This is obsessive thinking.
To reveal whether he was truly a psychopath and how he compares to other ancients behaving badly. Hannibal has a reputation as the cruelest general in antiquity, with a special streak of venom in his heart for Rome. To understand Hannibal better, psychiatrist David Mallet will analyze his behavior and then place him on a one-of-a-kind behaving badly psychometer to show how he compares to some of history's rogues like Genghis Khan and Caligula.
I need to assess whether the violence and brutality committed by Hannibal is for a strategic purpose or whether it's for his sheer pleasure.
Hannibal has a hair-raising charge sheet.
One actually states that Hannibal discussed the possibility with his generals of eating the bodies of the troops that died along the way through the Alps to get the other troops through. That's cannibalism.
He forced a Roman soldier into a fight to the death against an elephant. When a henchman deserted, Hannibal ordered the man's wife and children to be burned to death.
This is blood revenge, pure and simple.
He crucified a scout for giving him the wrong instructions. And he slaughtered 50,000 Roman soldiers in a single day.
Hannibal has this fearsome reputation, rapacious, cruel, almost a monster.
But the stories of cruelty all come from Rome, the city Hannibal tried to destroy. Can we trust them?
We can't be sure whether or not this is just propaganda, but we can be sure that the Romans would have tried to depict Hannibal as a barbarian.
So who was the real Hannibal? The search for answers begins in his childhood. He was born in 248 BC in Carthage, in modern-day Tunisia on the north coast of Africa. Sifting through the ruins, archaeologists have found evidence of religious rituals which involved the slaughter of animal or possibly even human victims.
This site is a fantastically preserved, rare Carthaginian temple, and in a site like this, Hannibal was brought as a child. He's forced to participate in a sacrifice, and his hands are placed in the blood still warm. And in that moment, his father makes him swear an oath and devote the rest of his life to trying to destroy Rome.
What happened here shaped Hannibal's psychology for the rest of his life.
We have a 9-year-old boy who looks up to his father, lionizes the great hero, wants to join him on his military adventure. His father says, okay, but first you must go through this brutal ritual. He incorporates the father's vision, the hatred of Rome, and makes it his own.
If the Roman stories are true, there's worse, much worse. They accuse the Carthaginians of sacrificing children to the gods.
One historian says that once when Carthage was attacked, the Carthaginians decided to repel the invaders by putting to death 500 innocent children. Now, normally you could get those children from families or the people from the lower classes, but this time they determined that a much more profound gesture was required. So they were to take the 500 children from 500 of the noblest families of Carthage, and those innocent children were taken before a statue of Baal and burned alive.
Historians have assumed this was Roman spin, designed to demonize the Carthaginians. But discoveries in the area of Carthage known as the Tophet have given them second thoughts.
This could be the most horrific sight in the ancient world.
Inside this cave, beneath these burial stones, archaeologists discovered layer upon layer of charred bone fragments. Their origin was a mystery, until new analytic techniques showed them to be human bones, the bones of young boys.
Now, today in the scholarship, there is a debate, and that is this human sacrifice, or is it just a child cemetery?
Slaughtering children? Some archaeologists find it unthinkable. Surely it never happened.
It's very difficult to determine the cause of death of these individuals because the remains of the people are burned. So you don't have the integrity of the skeleton. And it's not easy to determine this person died from a blow to the head, this person had his neck broken, or something like that. So it renders the whole situation much more difficult.
Another expert believes the evidence is simply overwhelming.
People have tried to say this isn't really child sacrifice. This is a cemetery of children who died very young. But the problem with it is immediately, if that were true, where are the females? It's a huge majority of males. This is pretty neat evidence, but it's possible that we have 30,000 human child sacrifices.
The verdict? The stories could be true.
Hannibal had to put his hand on the still breathing sacrifice. He didn't even know if it was an animal or if it was human. That would be an incredibly traumatic and dramatic event, life-changing.
What kind of impact could it have had on Hannibal?
He's going to toughen up, harden up. He's going to learn that life is cheap. He's like a child soul. And as he goes forward, he's going to pursue his father's vision. The effect on Hannibal is going to be profound.
So why all the hate? Carthage and Rome had been battling for years over control of trade in the Mediterranean. Hannibal's father was Carthage's army commander. A 23-year war raged across the Mediterranean. Hannibal, still a teenager, shipped out for the fighting in Spain. By his he commanded an army, and from the start he was no Mr. Nice Guy. Hannibal laid siege to the city of Saguntum, an ally, and his taste for treachery went on full, ruthless display.
It had been a long and drawn-out siege. Finally, the Saguntines sent their leaders to negotiate with Hannibal, and that's when he saw his chance. Contrary to the rules of war, he sent in his troops to kill every single man inside. People surrender. He says he'll let them go. Then he turns and slaughters them anyways. What kind of man is this? Today, we call that a war crime.
Hannibal set a pattern which he'd repeat throughout his life. He'd destroy anyone, but anyone who crossed him. In 2 BC, at the age of 30, Hannibal turned his malevolent eye on the grand prize, Rome itself. It was time, he decided, to fulfill his...
Let's put this decision into context. Rome is one of the world's great superpowers, and Hannibal's brother-in-law and have gone against Roman armies, but they've never gone Rome itself. Now Rome becomes the ultimate goal.
Hannibal set the stage epic struggle that would destroy entire Roman legions and kill tens of thousands of his own men. Hannibal of Carthage, at 30 years old, was fulfilling the blood oath he swore as a boy to Rome. The shortest way was by sea, straight across the Mediterranean. But there was a problem.
For Hannibal, and Rome by sea is no longer an option. Yes, historically, Carthage is a naval superpower, but after the last war fought by Hannibal's father, it's no longer an option. Rome and its navy now dominate the Mediterranean.
That would mean a forced march of 1,500 miles lasting 4 months for Hannibal's mercenaries.
Hannibal's army was a mixture of foreigners and mercenaries drawn over. He had Numidian-like cavalry from modern-day Algeria, for instance. He had Spanish swordsmen. He had specialist troops like the slingers from the Balearic Islands. So it was a real mix of races and languages and costumes and cultures.
As well as 50,000 soldiers, there were camp followers, even wives and children. It was an armed circus, right down to the elephants, 37 of them. Hannibal's superweapon.
The thing with elephants is that if you haven't seen one, they're incredibly terrifying. Once people see them, once they get used, they won't be quite so frightened. So it's a bit of a one-shot weapon anyway. It's a gamble.
Taking these lumbering beasts to the battlefield was the most well-known Hannibal ever made. And it could also have been his stupidest. Hannibal's problems started when a Roman army was to intercept him at Massilia, the modern-day Marseille. Hannibal decided he'd attack through the back door, across the Alps. Before he even got that far, the elephants spelled trouble.
This is the River Rhone on the northern outskirts of Arles. But of course in Hannibal's time it would have been open country here. And he's got the problem of how to get 50,000 men across this river in the face of hostile Gaulish tribesmen on the other side. That's bad enough. But he's also got the problem of how do you get 37 elephants across a river?
Hannibal ordered his men to build a huge raft to float the elephants across.
They got the elephants on in small groups. But of course, once the rocking started, the elephants panicked and some of them jumped off into the river. Their handlers were swept away and drowned. They say that all of the elephants got across. It must have been complete chaos.
And there was worse ahead. Here's what lay between Hannibal and Rome. The Alps, rising in places to nearly 16,000 feet. He left Spain in July, but it was now October. His army wasn't equipped for mountaineering, let alone in rapidly falling temperatures.
Conditions are horrific. The mercenary army is used to rough terrain, is used to difficult situations in North Africa. It's a totally different reality from going up in the Alps, 16,000 plus feet, the snow, the cold. It's a new experience, and they are going to be traumatized.
To understand how tough it would have been, we need to know what route Hannibal was to take. A team from Stanford University in California hopes to find out.
Hannibal's route, even after 2,230 years, is still a mystery. It's enough of a mystery that hundreds of books have been written about it. It's a detective story. You're clue to clue to clue, trying to match them up.
They investigate possible sites where Hannibal's army may have camped. They're looking for weapons, the ash from thousands of campfires, any clue that Hannibal passed this way.
You note here, we've got some black-colored material in the soil.
So far, they've found nothing. So they're turning to the ancient histories for clues instead.
If you look at this, we have 3 clues that we can extrapolate from this.
The best source, the Greek Polybius, 70 years after the crossing, gave no place names, but he did mention certain features of the landscape. One is called the Place of the White Rock. Local tribes attacked Hannibal.
This place has been a white rock place through history. And notice how it stands out dramatically because it's framed by the dark green forest around it. It fits Polybius' account exactly.
Based on this evidence, Hannibal must have headed for a high pass called the Col de Clapier, 8,000 feet above sea level, where temperatures can fall well below freezing. It's a totally alien environment for an African army.
Many of them may have never even seen snow before. And now suddenly, they're ascending up these alpine valleys, and they're seeing the snow heights above them. And it's getting closer and closer and colder and colder.
In this region, temperatures can fall to -5 degrees centigrade at night. It was bitterly cold for troops who were clad only in light linen garments. The effect of the temperature and thin air, oxygen at that height is 25% less than at sea level, can be did using a cold chamber.
We are going to have the chamber at -5 degrees Celsius, which is 23 degrees Fahrenheit. And they're in to simulate as if he was up on a mountain pass, and we can control oxygen levels at the same time. So we can replicate what Hannibal's soldiers will be doing in the Alps.
A volunteer wears a thin smock, like the clothing of Hannibal's Numidian cavalry. It's ideal for the hot conditions they're used to in Spain, but not for the windy, freezing October Alps. Hannibal's march from sea level to the high pass took 10 days, with the temperature steadily dropping. The volunteer begins to shiver after just a few minutes. He tries a dexterity test, but already his fingers can't perform the simplest task.
He's barely able to do any manual task at all with his hands and fingers right now. We are now at 18 minutes. Can we have you stand up again and do the hand grip test, please?
Hi, Stephen. I just did a hand grip test and my results were 29 kilograms.
His grip strength has declined by 40%. So how could he fight with a sword or grapple with an enemy?
Overall, their ability to use their hands, which are critical in survival, would have dropped quite a bit already. And this was only after 15 to 20 minutes in the cold.
Another 10 minutes, and the volunteer is really beginning to. The shivering is exhausting. His brain demands more oxygen to fight the fatigue. The rapid breathing sucks energy from his body. If this was one of Hannibal's men, he would no longer be able to think straight, or even walk straight on the perilous mountain trails.
One of the first signs of hypothermia is that you have difficulty focusing. You're really just focusing on putting one foot on the other. You don't really notice peripheral dangers that may happen. If the body temperature is still going to continue dropping, you're running the risk of cardiac arrest.
After 32 minutes, the doctor stops the experiment.
I was feeling pretty at the end there. Starting to warm up a bit, but as you can see, my hands are pretty red and they're pretty sore. Yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
To save themselves, Hannibal's men would have lit fires and taken the clothing off the dead. But half of Hannibal's army, 25,000 men, died in the Alps. Most of them perished from cold and exhaustion, others from disease.
So imagine we're an army following along each other's tracks. But this is a column that could be miles long. This column could be 20 miles long.
The people at the top are walking through fresh snow, but the people at the back are walking through slush and muck. And the drainage of the water they've used to, and now their feces in this water, something like cholera can bloom in 6 hours. You can be dead.
It should have taken 1 week to cross the Alps. Hannibal took 2. Why? It was down to those elephants. They slowed down the whole army, and they ate 140 kilos of fodder a day. All that food had to be carted Alps. Another commander might have thought, elephants in the Alps? Bad idea. But not Hannibal.
Hannibal's confronted with two choices. He hears from his lieutenants, my elephants are dying, my men are dying, just undergone this tremendous ordeal. On the other hand, another piece of me is saying, from my childhood, my father's vision and mine, go conquer Rome. At this point, despite that advice, his vision wins out.
And something else could have fueled Hannibal's obsession. He may have put himself in the hands of his god, the fearsome Baal, supreme god of the Carthaginians.
Baal's a mountain god. Baal's a storm god. Baal's a god who throws lightning bolts. You hear the rolling thunder in the mountains. We've just been hearing that in the last few minutes as a thunderstorm is moving in. Hannibal could mean something like grace of Baal, favor of Baal. Hannibal might be predisposed to going over the mountains where his god, Baal, is the god of those mountains.
His obsessive thinking, his fixation on Rome, now takes on a religious dimension. It becomes like a crusade. Hannibal sees the world around him validating this goal to go attack Rome.
By the time Hannibal reached this spot, looking down on Italy, he had lost half his army. The Col de Clapier was littered with dead soldiers and the carcasses of elephants.
Almost every one of those elephants is dead. The net effect of their use in battle? No.
Hannibal's obsession had killed 25,000 of his own men. Clearly, he was behaving badly. But worse, much worse was to come, as he drove his army forward with acts of unspeakable savagery. (218) Hannibal of Carthage had gambled everything on his lifelong obsession, the destruction of Rome.
Hannibal has one goal in mind, and because he disregards everything else, you get the idea that this is real obsessive thinking. This fixation about Rome will drive him forward.
Crossing the Alps into Italy, Hannibal had lost half his force of 50,000 men to cold, hunger, and disease. The survivors weren't happy. Hannibal needed to show them who was boss, so he rounded up some prisoners and made them fight to the death. The last man standing would go free. What was he trying to prove?
Hannibal demonstrates his view of life to all of his men. Life will be a struggle between life and death. Only the strongest, only the cleverest are going to survive. That's not just Hannibal's view, that's now everybody's view.
Hannibal's team talk worked, just like he'd hoped. He defeated the Roman legions sent to stop him at 2 battles in northern Italy. How did he manage it with his army? The answer? Rome wasn't then the superpower it would become in later centuries. The city was ruled by 2 consuls. Incredibly, they also took it in turns to command the army, a recipe for military disaster.
It was purely a political thing to make no one had supreme power and to share the job. Alternating day by day, command of the army never lasting more than 24 hours. Ideally, colleagues should cooperate, should both agree on a common plan. But if they didn't, there was nothing to stop one man doing the exact opposite of his colleague when it was his day in charge.
Hannibal was to exploit the Romans' weakness for all he was worth. He'd heard that they'd raised a new army in southern Italy, and so he bypassed Rome to seek out the enemy. Along the way, the ancient histories list a catalogue of war crimes.
Pliny the Elder, the historian, tells a bizarre story. He says that Hannibal takes a captured Roman soldier and he puts him up against an elephant. He says to the soldier, if you win in combat against an elephant, you will go freed. Now the strange thing is, the Roman soldier wins. What can Hannibal do? He can't let the story get out. He has the soldier put to death immediately.
Hannibal's discipline code was simple and brutal. When one of his supporters deserted, he seized the wife and daughter he left behind. These innocent victims were tortured and then burned alive.
The wife, they are innocent, but it doesn't matter. This is blood revenge, pure and simple. Hannibal would have felt absolutely justified in his actions. He's been betrayed, and with guilt comes punishment.
Something quite trivial could also get you killed. When Hannibal's scout took a wrong turning, Hannibal exploded with rage and had the man crucified. Why was Hannibal behaving so badly? Mindless violence? Or is there a rational explanation?
He's not a psychopath. He's not doing this for fun. He's setting examples for his troops. It's cruel, but it's cruelty with a purpose.
During the long march south, Hannibal acquired an infection that permanently blinded him in his right eye. It didn't help his disposition. August 216 BC. Hannibal's army reached Cannae in southern Italy. With rebels enlisted along the way, his army was now 20,000 strong. The Roman army Hannibal confronted was as big. But two part-time generals, Paulus and Varro, are fighting each other instead of working out a strategy to defeat Hannibal.
The Roman generals at Cannae certainly weren't very experienced. Paulus had been consul once before. Varro had never held that office, and he'd never commanded an army. They were concerned that the battle should be fought when they were in charge, because if they were in charge on the day, they would get the most credit for victory.
By the end of the day, these fields soaked in Roman blood.
It's really hard to get your head around the numbers. Something on the order of 30,000 gallons of blood were spilled on the battlefield down there. Today, even today, it's still called the Campo di Sangue, the field of blood.
The Roman generals' inexperience made them easy meat for Hannibal.
What he does is, he lines his troops in a crescent shape. His weakest infantry is here. Now that sounds like it's crazy, but Hannibal has a plan.
He kept his elite infantry in reserve and used the less experienced soldiers in the middle of the crescent as bait.
When this crescent collapses, as he knew it would, the Romans rush forward. They think they're winning.
The Romans plunged into the center of the Carthaginian army, and Hannibal sprang his trap.
That's when Hannibal sends his troops around and totally encircles the Romans. That's when the real slaughter begins.
The Romans were so hemmed in, they couldn't fight. 50,000 Romans were slaughtered, a 7% casualty rate.
Remember that all these men were either slashed, stabbed, clubbed, or crushed to death. It must have been extremely exhausting for the guy killing.
Was Hannibal magnanimous in victory? In no way. He ordered his troops to slash the hamstrings of the defeated Romans who couldn't run away. They died slowly and in agony. Many committed suicide. The morning after presented a gruesome scene. The Cannae battlefield was littered with corpses, with their heads buried in shallow holes.
This must have seemed really bizarre, but it turns out, in order to end their suffering, the Romans were scraping, digging holes, and sticking their heads inside to eat the dirt. to suffocate themselves. It's like drowning with dirt. And that gives a sense of the agony they must have felt. That gives you a sense of the terror and the suffering that would have experienced that night after the Battle of Annihilation.
Cannae, the most crushing defeat Rome was ever to suffer. The city itself was now at Hannibal's mercy. 216 BC. After 2 years of war, Rome was at Hannibal's mercy. So why didn't he go in for the kill? It's a question that has intrigued historians ever since.
It's really hard to know what's going on in the mind of Hannibal. What's he thinking? Now, they say that he didn't attack the walls of Rome because he didn't have siege equipment. But this was a guy that wrote his own rules. This was a guy that took an army and elephants over the Alps. Surely, if Hannibal had wanted to besiege Rome, he could have gotten the siege engines.
Hannibal was good in battle, maybe even a genius. But he was a better soldier than he was a politician. He tried to build an alliance of rebel Italians and failed miserably.
He wants to take on Rome, and yet he has a very limited skill set. Hannibal knows how to win a battle, but what he lacks is the flexibility and creativity to be a diplomat.
Instead of winning over new allies, Hannibal still thought a superweapon was the way to victory. The elephants had proved to be a disaster. Next, he tried to turn snakes into a weapon of war.
Credited with inventing this rather novel technique where he gets his men to gather basketfuls of snakes, and then these are fired by artillery over onto the decks of enemy warships. Now, a crowded warship, lots and lots of rowers, this isn't something where you want panic and everybody running out of the way of these ferocious reptiles.
It sounds scary, but would it work? Forensic engineer Jeff Archbold will simulate a snake bomb attack to find out whether the snakes would even survive being fired through the air.
We're assuming that the two warfaring ships are about 200 feet apart, about 60 meters apart. In order to get one of these earthen pots to travel 200 feet, it's going to have an initial launch velocity of about 55 miles per hour. To make the pot do this, it's going to get launched 50 feet in the air. The major impact is going to be the vertical impact. So that's what we're going to try and recreate.
Reptile expert Lee Parker believes this substitute for a real snake will tell him all he needs to know.
We've gone with the closest density of what it's kind of be like, with the skin casing, which would be similar to that in the skin of the snake, the organs that would be inside a snake, muscle tissues and things like that would definitely be like this.
Next will measure the force of the impact.
Recorded here is a peak impact of a little over 1,100 kilograms. So we're looking at about 130 to 140 G's force. That's the type of thing that would kill a human, but snakes being smaller, they may have survived.
The snakes in the base of the pot cushion the impact above, so most of them survive.
The feasibility of this is actually quite high. 10 to 20% of the snakes in a pot would have died upon impact, but 80% of the snakes would survive and would be psychologically quite a shock to have a bunch of snakes land.
The weapon works in theory, but was it any use?
It might win a few early engagements in a battle. It isn't going to win the battle on its own, and Hannibal doesn't manage success.
Hannibal's fixation on a superweapon, whether elephants or snakes, shows his lack of strategic judgment.
It's a little bit like the way in which Hitler invested huge resources in developing rocket technology in the Second World War, when almost certainly he'd have been much better off putting resources into conventional weaponry. I think Hannibal had the same problem. He thought the super weapon was the solution to his problem. He'd probably have been better off investing more resources in more infantry, more cavalry, more conventional weaponry.
Hannibal's war began as a blitzkrieg, but now turned into a long, slow stalemate.
The major miscalculation that Hannibal made was underestimating the ability of the Romans to soak up punishment. They could lose 50,000 men in a battle, but there were still 700,000 men altogether available to be recruited in Italy. So they could suffer the horrendous losses of a battle like Cannae 10 times over and still keep fighting.
Hannibal lingered in Italy for 13 years. He was 45 years of age when the Romans launched their own surprise attack on Carthage.
In 203 BC, Hannibal is ordered back here to Carthage by the elders. There's a Roman army camped right outside the city. What is he still doing in Italy?
The showdown happened here, the plain of Zama in North Africa. Despite his disastrous experience with them in the Alps, Hannibal once again turned to his favorite superweapon, war elephant.
Hannibal had 80 elephants at his disposal, and he's got to get these guys fired up for the battle. So what the ancient sources say he does is he gives them alcohol, also going to antagonize them. He's going to stab them in the ankles. So you've got them both drunk, and you've also got them infuriated. Then all you've got to do at that point is turn on the enemy and let him loose.
But the Romans had a simple defense plan. The legions opened up gaps in the ranks, and the great beasts thundered right through. Some even turned back and plowed into Hannibal's own lines. The battle was a crushing defeat for Hannibal. Hannibal's reputation for military genius now to the man who beat him, the Roman general Scipio. Hannibal won many battles against the Romans, never came close to winning the war. He was a colossal failure, yet history says he was a genius. How could that be? Hannibal had spent 15 years trying to conquer Rome and failed. He'd fought a major battle on his home turf and lost. Yet history seems to be telling us he was a great general. Why is this?
If you describe Hannibal as a great leader, as a great military genius, and then you beat him, it makes you look even better.
You always have to ask, who's written the history? Is there a vested interest? Is there a hidden agenda? In this case, the answer's fascinating and may very well explain why we have the image of Hannibal that we do.
The most detailed account of Hannibal's invasion of Italy comes from the historian Polybius, writing 70 years after the event.
Polybius tells us that he visited many of the locations, the Alps, some of the battle sites and so on, and also that he spoke to some of the veterans and actually fought with Hannibal. And this is why we should trust his account. But if you think about it, even if those veterans had been boys at the time of the war, they'd been well into their 80s when they were supposedly talking to Polybius. And this is a world where life expectancy is low. So at the very least, we have a question mark over the reliability of Polybius's account.
Why would Polybius lie? It turns out he was paid by the family of Scipio, the man who defeated Hannibal.
In effect, Polybius was the family's spin doctor. The best way to make Scipio into a military genius was to portray Hannibal as a military genius as well. There was really no credit for Scipio if Hannibal was portrayed as a second-rater and a loser.
The verdict? Hannibal was not nearly the military genius that history and legend made him out to be. Hannibal quit Carthage after the disastrous Battle of Zama, but he was still looking for a fight.
He's still got to make a living to survive. So he goes to the eastern Mediterranean, where kingdoms are still independent, and some of them are hostile to Rome. Hannibal still likes the idea of fighting against the Romans, but really he's just a mercenary.
Hannibal was a marked man, Rome's most wanted. In 182 BC, in Bithynia, modern-day Turkey, Hannibal heard that a Roman strike force was moving in on his position.
He won't let the Romans, he certainly won't let them capture him and perhaps drag him back to Rome in triumph in chains. So Hannibal takes poison and takes his own life. Right to the very end, he is in charge of his own destiny.
So who was the real Hannibal? He grew up steeped in hatred for Rome and crushed anyone who crossed him. Even the smallest slight, like giving him the wrong directions, could get you killed. A great general, he won battlefield victories, but lost a war. He made cold-blooded choices that killed half his army and stubbornly pursued plans that were pure folly. So where does Hannibal fit on the psychological scale of ancients behaving badly?
Hannibal has caused tens of thousands of deaths, 50,000 of Cannae, 25,000 of his own men crossing the Alps. But these deaths are goal-directed. They have a purpose.
That puts Hannibal on the level as Julius Caesar and Genghis Khan, for whom killing was strictly business rather than pleasure.
If this represented psychopathic, we would see it as much more random, much more sadistic, much more for his own pleasure, and not attached to a grand idea.
And there's something about Hannibal's personality. On the Alpine death march, it was obvious that he'd blundered, but he wouldn't or couldn't quit.
Hannibal scores very high on the mental obsessiveness scale. Since he was 9 years old, he has single-mindedly pursued this obsession to destroy Rome, a vision he inherited from his father. It doesn't matter what else is going on in life. He doesn't have the flexibility to look beyond that.
And so this is how Hannibal scores. A profile similar to the 13th century Scottish warlord William Wallace, the inspiration for the movie Braveheart, whose fatal obsession was to crush the English.
We have two guys who are both willing to sacrifice troops to get the job done. It's about winning a battle. They're brilliant tacticians, and yet off the battlefield, we see gentlemen who do not have the flexibility and creativity to excel in other aspects of their life.
The Romans turned out to be far better empire builders than Hannibal. They were better image makers too, cleverly building up the reputation of their bitterest enemy. 40 years after Hannibal's death, the Romans obliterated Carthage, and the only Hannibal to survive was the one suited their purposes.